Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Tuesday, December 10th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. Mulls removing HTS from terror list. So this was expected in the wake of the overthrow of Assad. The U.S. is considering removing the al-Qaeda offshoot Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, from the list of U.S. designated terror organizations after the group led the offensive that ousted former Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The Washington Post reported that U.S. officials are in contact with HTS and other groups involved in the offensive. One U.S. official said the Biden administration was doing a real-time assessment on whether or not HTS should be removed from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. Politico reported that there is a furious debate among U.S. officials about the issue. One U.S. official said, quote, "There is a huge scramble to see if and how and when we can delist HTS," end quote. HTS's leader, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, also has a $10 million bounty, a U.S. bounty on his head, and U.S. officials are also considering removing that. So Julani, we've been talking about his background a lot. He joined al-Qaeda in Iraq to fight against the invading U.S. forces in 2003. He was in a series of, he was imprisoned by American forces for years. In 2011, he went over to Syria and started al-Nusra, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, with the blessing of Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS at the time. And then in 2016, he went on this rebranding campaign. And then 2017, they formed HTS out of al-Nusra and other Islamist groups. And his message has been that he does not, seek global jihad. He doesn't want to attack the West. He just wants, local control. And he's been portraying himself as a moderate. He did that CNN interview recently. And President Biden says he likes what he's hearing from the former al-Qaeda leader. I mentioned this quote yesterday, but it's worth repeating because he is talking about Julani here. Biden said, quote, "We've taken notes of statements by leaders of this revolution in recent days, and they're saying the right things now, but as they take on greater responsibility, we will assess not just their words, but their actions," end quote. So removing HTS from the terror list could allow the U.S. to provide significant aid to an HTS-led government. Reports on Monday said that Mohammed al-Bashir, who was the prime minister of the HTS-led Salvation government in Idlib, has been appointed as the new prime minister of Syria. So the guy who was the head of Idlib under HTS has now been appointed to be the new prime minister of Syria. So again, this shows HTS is the group that led this offensive, and they're the group that's going to be overseeing this government. You look at past conflicts, Libya, Iraq, the destabilization and the U.S. backing groups like this, what that has led to, Afghanistan, go back to the 80s. I think the whole terror designation system is flawed. This is how you justify like what Israel does to Hezbollah, Hamas guys, bombing them in their homes and slaughtering their families along with them. You just say, oh, they're terrorists. So, we can do that apparently. The U.S. has done things like that, throughout the terror war. But this just goes to show how the U.S., uses these things to pick and choose. They have Iran's IRGC is designated as a terrorist group. Hamas, of course, and Hezbollah. So again, that's how they justify bombing them in their homes. But when there's a group like this, even when their leader came from al-Qaeda and ISIS, they're ready to play ball because they prefer them to Assad, and so does Israel. So we'll see how this all plays out. So also another thing that happened on Monday was al-Jalali, who's the prime minister under Assad. So he stuck around. He said that they're ready to, work on a transfer of power. He actually met with Jelani on Monday, and HTS is saying that it's going to grant amnesty to any conscripts who fought in Assad's army. Assad's Ba'ath Party also released a statement saying that it supports the transitional phase in Syria. So far, we haven't seen any big crackdown on the pro-Assad elements, but for now, we're not seeing that. It seems like Jelani is keeping his people in line here. But the risk is, of course, they could just be doing this as a for PR purposes to get that support from the West and crack down later. Or there's always also the risk of all the different factions starting to fight each other and real bloodshed happening. But we'll see how it all plays out. All right, so the next one here, the U.S., Israel, and Turkey bomb Syria after cheering regime change. This article is from Jason Ditz, kind of a roundup of all the different airstrikes that have hit Syria since Assad was thrown out, and there has been a lot. So several nations have been loudly cheering the weekend regime change in Syria, and some are even taking credit for it. Of course, that's Netanyahu, and even Biden is doing that now. But despite the Islamist faction that they were backing ending up taking Damascus, neither the U.S., Turkey, nor Israel are actually stopping attacks on Syrian territory. If anything, they are increasing strikes. The U.S., Turkey, and Israel all carried out airstrikes inside their respective spheres of influence in Syria after the regime change was announced. None of them indicated that these are to be seen as one-off strikes or a special situation. Rather, it appears to be the new normal. So on Sunday, Israel was carrying out major airstrikes across Syria and also sent ground troops to seize that buffer zone in the Golan Heights. We'll get more into that. And we have a couple other stories about that whole thing that's happening. But Israel pounded Syria again on Monday. They're saying this is the heaviest Israeli bombing of Syria since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. So really heavy bombing of Syria. And this is before this Syrian government, or this HTS-led government that's going to take over. They haven't put anything official out about their view on Israel. We've seen all these reports about fighters involved saying that they want ties with Israel, that they want they want a Israeli embassy in Damascus. But we've also seen, there's a video that came out today of some of the fighters saying that they're going to Jerusalem, that they're going to liberate the Palestinians. So we haven't seen an official statement from Jelani about how they're going to handle Israel, yet Israel is just bombing away. I mean, giving them a reason to make them their enemy. But the reason why Israel still, even if they are hostile toward Israel, the reason why they'll prefer them way over Assad is that they're not going to be aligned with Hezbollah and Iran. That's been made very clear. So the U.S. carried out multiple strikes. This is about the strikes on the ISIS that they said were ISIS camps. And so, Jason, I like the way he worded here. The U.S. said they wanted to prevent the Islamists from taking advantage of the Syria takeover by a separate Islamist faction. And the U.S. has been getting the Kurdish SDF to take advantage of the situation and take more territory. So those were the U.S. airstrikes that they said targeted ISIS camps. Still haven't seen a clear picture of the casualties in those strikes. But they were very heavy. I mean, B-52 bombers. And then Turkish drones have been quite active in northern Syria since the fall of Damascus. In the last 24 hours, and this was written on Monday, Turkish drone strikes have killed at least dozens of people, including 15 former soldiers and 3 members of Syrian Kurds' security apparatus. They also killed 11 civilians, including 6 children in the Kurdish region of Syria. So Turkey is, they bomb the Kurds all the time, but it seems like they're going to really keep up the pressure. They're going to really want to shape the situation in northern Syria and northeast Syria with everything that's happened here. So lots of airstrikes across the country in just these few days. All right, so the next one here, Hamas congratulates Syria after the fall of Assad government. This article's from The Cradle. Just thought it was interesting to see Hamas's response to the regime change. The Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, released a statement on December 9th congratulating the Syrian people, quote, on achieving their aspirations for freedom and justice, end quote. I'll read the rest of their statement. Quote, "We congratulate the Syrian people on achieving their aspirations for freedom and justice. We urge all segments of Syrian society to come together and move beyond the hardships of the past. We stand firmly with the Syrian people and reaffirm our commitment to Syria's unity and territorial integrity. We believe the Syrian people have the resilience to overcome challenges and navigate this critical period," end quote. So the interesting thing about Hamas is that Hamas backed the regime change effort against Assad, and so they frayed relations with Assad, even though Hamas was aligned with Iran and Hezbollah, who were strongly backing Assad. I think it did strain relations between Hamas and Iran. In 2022, Hamas and the Syrian government reconciled, and they reestablished relations, and since then they've been on good terms. So, and there's been some, I think some Hamas political leaders are based or were based in Syria again after that. So, just wanted to, put their statement out there on this. The next one here, the U.S. backs Israel's land grab in Syria. So on Monday, the U.S. State Department backed Israel's seizure of territory in Syria that came after the collapse of the government of Assad, framing it as a defensive action, of course. So Israel seized a buffer zone between the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights and the rest of Syria's territory that was established in 1974, and also captured several areas beyond the zone. When asked about the land grab, State Department spokesman Matt Miller said that it was important to put the situation in context. Miller said, quote, "First of all, the Syrian army abandoned its positions in the area around the negotiated Israeli-Syrian buffer zone, which potentially creates a vacuum that could have been filled by terrorist organizations that would threaten the state of Israel and would threaten civilians inside Israel. Every country has the right to take action against terrorist organizations. The second thing that is important is that Israel has said that these actions are temporary to defend its borders. These are not permanent actions," end quote. So don't worry. It's just temporary. It's not like Israel has a history of occupying territory or anything. And also, I have another story on this, but Netanyahu declared on Monday that the Golan Heights would be Israel's forever. It's not clear if he means also the territory in the Golan Heights that they just captured, but several Arab countries, including Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, strongly condemned the Israeli seizure of Syria's territory. The Qatari foreign minister said it considered the move, quote, "a dangerous development and a blatant attack on Syria's sovereignty and unity, as well as a flagrant violation of international law," end quote. Saudi Arabia said the land grab confirmed, quote, "Israel's continued violation of the rules of international law and its determination to sabotage Syria's chances of restoring its security, stability, and territorial integrity," end quote. So this is the buffer zone that they captured, and they also captured territory beyond the buffer zone, and there's a chance that they could keep moving in. And this is an area patrolled by a UN peacekeeping force, and there were signs that Israel was going to make a move on this months before Assad was overthrown. There was a report from the Associated Press looking at satellite images of Israeli construction happening along this buffer zone that the UN peacekeeping force said was a violation of the ceasefire agreement. So, Israel, probably had its sights on taking this buffer zone, taking these areas, before Assad fell. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu says occupied Golan Heights will be Israel's forever. So again, Netanyahu said on Monday that I just thought this was worthy of its own story. He said that the occupied Golan Heights will be Israel's forever. And the Golan Heights, Israel took this from Syria during the 1967 war, and they annexed the territory in 1981, and that was not recognized by any country until 2019 when the Trump administration recognized the territory as Israeli. So Netanyahu said, quote, "I would like to take this opportunity to thank my friend, President-elect Donald Trump, for acceding to my request to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights in 2019. Today, everyone understands the great importance of our presence there on the Golan, and not on the foothills of the Golan. The Golan Heights will forever be an inseparable part of the state of Israel," end quote. So they're going to keep it forever. And then I just mentioned again some of the stuff with the buffer zone and the territory that they've taken, and also the Israeli strikes. They've just been again pounding Syria. I linked to another article from the Cradle here. It says Israel has unleashed hell across Syria with over 250 airstrikes since the fall of Damascus. So that's just on Sunday and Monday, 250 airstrikes in Syria. And they're saying, they want to keep these weapons out of the hands of hostile groups. What they want is just a weakened, a shattered, weakened state that can't threaten Israel. All right, so the next one here, Israeli attacks kill 50 Palestinians in Gaza, so the slaughter continues in Gaza. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that Israeli attacks killed at least 50 Palestinians and wounded 84 over the previous 24-hour period. Israeli strikes on Monday included an overnight attack on Palestinians in the southern city of Rafah who had lined up to buy flour, so another flour massacre that killed 10 Palestinians. In central Gaza, a significant number of women and children were slaughtered or wounded by Israeli attacks. Bodies were piling up at the Al-Aqsa hospital in central Gaza after at least 9 people from the same family, mostly women and children, were killed by an Israeli strike on the Berej refugee camp, and at least 2 children were killed and others were injured in a strike on the Maghazi refugee camp in central Gaza, and they were also taken to the Al-Aqsa hospital. So you see these children who were wounded in the strikes. And I was looking through the pictures from the hospital. Lots of pictures of dead children, lots of dead bodies of kids, and lots of wounded kids. This is just one group of them. I mean, it looks like it was just an absolute massacre of children. And Israeli strikes also continue to pound northern Gaza, which has been under siege since early October as part of an ethnic cleansing campaign. According to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, several civilians were killed by an Israeli strike on a school-turned-shelter in Jabalia, and others were killed on strikes by strikes near the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia. So the Kamal Adwan Hospital has just come under constant attack, and they're warning that they've been cut off. Their electricity, water, and oxygen has been cut off, and they're warning that the patients are going to die. So just absolutely horrific day in and day out in Gaza, and it's just barely getting any attention at this point. All right, so the next one here, Israeli finance minister says now is the time to seize control of Gaza. So this article is from the Libertarian Institute from Kyle Anzalone. Israeli finance minister Bezalel Smotrich said Tel Aviv should exploit the downfall of Bashar al-Assad in Syria and seize the Gaza Strip. At a meeting of his religious Zionist party on Monday, Smotrich said, quote, "We've seen in Syria how regime change leaders flee like rats when they realize they've lost their grip on power. The same can be achieved in Gaza. We are close. We've already made tremendous strides there. Now we must take the next step to secure a decisive and clear victory. It is time to seize control of Gaza and strip Hamas of its civilian authority, cutting off its lifeline. We must end the policy of containment and defense and shift to initiative and offense. We must dismantle terror hubs, strengthen Jewish settlements, and create facts on the ground that prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state and remove this possibility from the agenda once and for all," end quote. So Smotrich, for a long time, has been on the record wanting to conquer the West Bank, kick all the Palestinians out of there. And, the reference he makes there, establish facts on the ground. That was the strategy for the West Bank, is start building these settlements and you create facts on the ground that there's this big Israeli population there now. So the idea of a Palestinian state just is not realistic. So he wants to do the same thing in Gaza, and that's what the Israeli settler leaders, which Smotrich is a settler, and he's also a minister in charge of expanding settlements in the West Bank. But I think of that woman, Daniela Weiss, who recently got into Gaza to scout locations. She's saying they want to do the same strategy in Gaza. Get some families in there, first you set up tents, then you build some kind of structure. Then, you have a house all of a sudden. And then, next to the Israeli military bases where the soldiers aren't going to do anything to get them out of there because they support the settlements. This is what they want to get going here. All right, so the next one here. Israeli soldier was ordered to kill a Palestinian holding a white flag. This article is from Middle East Eye. A former Israeli reserve soldier who served in Gaza has revealed that army commanders instruct troops to open fire on any Palestinian regardless of whether or not they pose a threat. In a Haaretz article published on Wednesday, this was last week, Israeli journalist Chaim Har-Zahav, who served an 86-day reserve mission in the enclave, detailed what he witnessed during that time. So he talks about them being ordered to shoot a Palestinian waving a white flag, but what I thought was kind of the most sickening out of this was what he says about the dogs in Gaza. The Israeli soldiers have stricter rules for when they can shoot dogs than the people, just kind of the way he puts it. So he said, quote, "The lives of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip depend first and foremost on the private and personal scale of values of the commanders in the Strip. A human life in the Gaza Strip is worth less than the lives of the thousands of stray dogs that roam the area looking for food. While there is a clear order prohibiting shooting dogs unless a soldier is in real danger, when the dog's jaws are locked on him, humans are permitted to be shot without any real restrictions," end quote. In the piece, Har-Zahav relayed an incident that involved a senior commander ordering the shooting of an unarmed man waving a white flag. Though the general was told the man did not pose a threat and was clearly without weapons, he responded by saying, quote, "I don't know what a white flag is. Shoot him. It's not an order," end quote. So he said, in this case, nobody carried out the order to shoot the man with the white flag, but we've seen videos of this happening. I remember when I covered it was like 3 guys walking with a white flag, and they got shot at, and I think one of them was killed. There's also a woman who was with a child that had a white flag, and she was shot and killed. So this happens all the time. All right, so the next one here, Israel and Hamas close to reaching a small ceasefire deal. This article is from the Anadolu Agency, which is a Turkish outlet, but it's based on Israeli reports. I've seen stuff like this for months now, about potential ceasefire deals. I really just wanted to highlight just so people are aware that there is some kind of back channel talks going on. So Israel and Hamas are close to reaching a small ceasefire deal, the Israeli Broadcasting Authority reported Sunday, citing political sources. The Broadcasting Authority quoted the unnamed Israeli sources as saying that the two sides are close to finalizing a deal that would include a 2-month ceasefire. The deal would also involve the releasing of prisoners under humanitarian cases, including the elderly, women, and the wounded and the sick, and the withdrawal of the Israeli army from parts of the Gaza Strip, the sources said without providing further details. Hamas and mediating countries, Egypt and Qatar, have not commented on the report. A Hamas delegation led by Deputy Leader Khalil al-Hayya left Cairo late Sunday after a meeting with the head of Egypt's General Intelligence Service, Major General Hassan Rashad, during which they discussed efforts to implement a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The delegation emphasized its commitment to ensuring the success of the efforts and ending the aggression against the Palestinian people. So we will see. I'm doubtful that any deal is going to happen right now. I would think it wouldn't happen before Israel kind of completes its ethnic cleansing campaign in northern Gaza, or at least completes it in the 3 cities it's been working on. But I guess you never know. And what was I going to say? I was going to say something else about the chance of a deal, but again, we've seen just so many stories like this for months now, but hopefully there's some kind of peace. I mean, what they're saying here is a temporary ceasefire. Israel's not going to agree to anything permanent, unfortunately. All right, so the next one here, Israel continues to violate Lebanon ceasefire. So even if there is a ceasefire, Israel, there's a good chance they won't abide by it. Israel continued its violations of the ceasefire in Lebanon on Monday by launching an airstrike in the southern Lebanese town of Bint Jebel that killed at least 1 civilian and wounded 4 Lebanese soldiers. The Lebanese army said in a statement, quote, "The Israeli enemy targeted a car near the Saf al-Hawa Bint Jebel military checkpoint, killing a citizen and lightly wounding 4 soldiers," end quote. So a day earlier, Israeli strikes in southern Lebanon killed 3 civilians. Since the ceasefire was supposed to go into effect on November 27th, Israeli attacks have killed at least 24 people in Lebanon. and Lebanon has reported around 160 ceasefire violations. So Israeli ceasefire violations. And as far as I know, all Hezbollah has done is fire those 2 rockets toward Israeli positions. But Israel just continues to bomb Lebanon with impunity. And this is, the U.S. gave Israel guarantees that it could do this as a letter that was separate from the deal that Lebanon actually signed with Israel. That's what happens when you have the U.S. pretending like it's a neutral mediator in a conflict with Israel. All right, so the last one here, automatic draft registration plan removed from the NDAA. So this article is from Edward Hosbrook, and he covers the draft stuff, the selective service stuff. So an ill-considered and unworkable proposal by the selective service system to try to automatically register all men ages 18 to 26 for a possible future military draft has been removed from the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, for the fiscal year 2025, and that's the annual military spending bill. The proposal for automatic draft registration was included in both the House and Senate versions of this year's NDAA without hearings, budget review, or debate, but was removed during closed-door House-Senate conference negotiations. A proposal to expand selective service to young women as well as young men, which was included in the Senate version of the NDAA, but not in the House version, was also removed by the House-Senate conference. The conference proposal for the fiscal year 2025 has yet to be considered by either the House or the Senate, although it is likely to be one of the highest priorities for the brief lame duck sitting before the end of this session in Congress. So the conference proposal could, in theory, be amended during floor consideration in either or both chambers, but in practice, members of Congress probably have higher priorities for last-minute compromises on the NDAA. The proposals for expansion and attempted automation of draft registration are unlikely to be reinstated in this year's NDAA before it is enacted. So this is good that these measures are not going to be included, that an automatic draft registration and expanding the draft to women is not going to be in the NDAA. That's a very good thing. So there's been here we go. The latest version of the Selective Service Repeal Act, which would repeal the Selective Service, it never made it out of committee, and it seems destined to die at the end of the session, but that's something you could tell your representative and senator to support the Selective Service Repeal Act, especially as, you have the U.S. openly preparing for war with China, ramping things up with Russia. If there is a World War III or, any other big conflict that the U.S. gets involved in, they might be looking to draft people. So any effort to oppose that, to work against that, to make that less likely is always welcome. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Robert Geller, Defend the Guard, Protecting National Guard Soldiers from Unconstitutional Wars. So go check that out. And again, I always put the link in the description if you want to help volunteer with Defend the Guard phone bank. And this is legislation that would prohibit the federal government from deploying a state's National Guard overseas into a conflict zone. So some good information about that here. One from Ted Galen Carpenter, Warning Signs for Washington's East Asia Policy. One from Joseph Solis Mullen, Ignoring China's Red Lines Could Make Taiwan the Next Ukraine. One from Daoud Kutab, Settler Monster is Stealing Jerusalem's Authentic Tale. And the spotlight is from Branko Marchteach, Meet Trump's New National Security Council. So please go check all that stuff out. Check out our blog. Lots of content over there. Oh, Scott Horton was just on with Candace Owens. I didn't finish watching it, but I watched most of it, and it was really great. I mean, she's huge, so for her to have Scott on is great. He was supposed to go on there to talk about his book, Provoked, but here we go. Here it is. But they talked about Syria and kind of the war on terror stuff in Israel, because that was just such in the news. And she's saying she's going to have him back again soon to talk about the book. So that's great. And Scott also did a one-on-one debate with General Wesley Clark on the Piers Morgan show. That hasn't come out yet, but I think it's going to come out on Tuesday. So big things are happening for Scott with this book and everything, which is very good. So that's everything. You could always support this show, like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends about antiwar.com. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.